also think that one of the side effects of this is, very candidly, you're going to motivate black turnout.
So we unfortunately continue to be trapped in the same vicious cycle on redistricting, where we continue to beat the left. Every time Democrats bring legal challenges against us in court, they are defeated, and that once again happened today. But the RINOs dropped the ball in the end, because despite the Supreme Court decision that made it extremely clear racial gerrymandering is illegal, despite the massive opportunity that Republicans now have, not just to win, not just to do something politically beneficial for themselves, I don't know why you wouldn't do that, but also do something good, moral, and principled, because after all, affirmative action DEI Democrat districts shouldn't exist in the first place. It's a genuinely ideological conservative thing as well to get rid of these things. We have RINO state legislatures that just sit there and say, oh no, we don't think we're going to redistrict. We're going to defy the Supreme Court, actually. Maybe we'll do it in 2027 or something like that, or just not do it at all. And much like Indiana, it's always the case that either you have to push these RINOs to the maximum 100% to do anything, right, to get off their butts, or in some cases they just refuse, and very nasty primary challenges that we are going to win, by the way, have to ensue. But this is currently the case. Latest updates as of today, after we spoke about the South Carolina state legislature that decided not to go through with a special session to redistrict, basically saying, oh, no, we're not going to do it. Maybe next year. And then the GOP state Senate leader was on the floor talking about how, I believe we need a healthy and viable Democrat Party in this country, and competition is good. And, you know, Republicans shouldn't play to win was basically the message there. It turns out that Governor McMaster of South Carolina has now basically forced the legislature into session, because the Senate refused to do their own special session, so now he is using his governor powers to call it, which is certainly a good development. But I think we're still waiting to find out whether the state senators are going to pull in Indiana, because it's one thing to say we're not going to vote to have a special session. It's another thing to put your name on the book, right? We opposed redistricting. We'll keep an eye on this. This is going to be quite a contentious political battle, but President Trump is already inserting himself, basically saying, hey, I'm going to be watching. The message should be clear, you would think, to these state legislators. They saw what just happened to Indiana. Are they self-destructive or something? Why would they want them to that to happen to them as well? Not sure. They just think they're invincible. Oh, I'm a 20-year incumbent, therefore I'll be okay. Yeah, how'd that work out in Indiana? I'm not exactly sure, but it doesn't stop there, because while this is happening, while Republicans continue to be their own worst enemies, we're still winning in the courts, okay? So I don't want to, in this video, I don't think the complaint should be about leftists, because we're beating the leftists. It's ourselves who are really beating ourselves. We have another legal victory, and then apparently a similar scene over in Mississippi that we witnessed earlier in South Carolina, where in this case, the rather RINO governor has canceled the Mississippi special session after a court ruling that he didn't actually have to comply with, and we'll explain that. But let me ask to the Republicans too, why should a court have to force you to redistrict now? Shouldn't it be obvious that, hey, if we're allowed to do it, we should do it, right? If we're allowed to win, if we're given the opportunity, shouldn't we just take that without being forced by an injunction or something to legally have to? I guess not. I guess not. So this is the nonsense. This is the institutional rot that we are dealing with. This has always been a concern too of mine, by the way, is that, yes, obviously the Supreme Court decision hands a huge opportunity for the deep red states in the deep South to really take a lot of political power away from the insane communist left on the other side. But if you know anything about deep red states, usually it's the case that because, you know, as I said, the GOP there becomes an institution, you get this rot of these old geriatric fossil incumbents and their handpicked successors and all that stuff. This is the product you get, which is, you would think the most conservative states should reflect the most conservative politics, but that's not the case. Although, as we've seen, now in Texas, now in Indiana, a lot of Republican primary voters are starting to wake up to this stuff, maybe in ways they didn't before. And so that should be something, frankly, that a lot of the Republican elected politicians, I should say, keep in mind nationwide. But I guess not. I guess they're going to be so self-destructive politically that not only do they choose willingly to lose to the left, they also lose to their own voter base. And for what? So you can take a contributorship job at CNN or MSNBC after this? It's ridiculous. It's unacceptable. But we'll get into these stories here today, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, after our story yesterday or the other day documenting how that ridiculous South Carolina state legislature decided, the state Senate in particular, I should point out, the state House was perfectly fine. Usually the House are, the younger guys more in touch with the base, but the Senate, longer terms, as I said, these people become institutions. They made this whole principled conservative quote unquote speech, which really just means their only principles losing to the left, right? But about how, we should ensure fairness. And that's why Jim Clyburn, one of the biggest race communists in the history of the United States, should actually be allowed to keep his seat. We shouldn't just totally screw over the Democrat Party because we believe in fairness, even though have you ever seen a Democrat get up there? Did the Virginia Democrats get on the floor and say, I think we should preserve a fair power balance in this state? No, they play to win. That's what's so frustrating to me. At what point, I think our base gets it, like the voters get it. We don't have to explain this over and over, but at what point are our politicians going to understand, hey, actually in politics, the goal is to win, right? The goal is victory, because guess what? If you don't win, none of your so-called quote unquote principles can be implemented. And yes, as we saw in Indiana, and why I feel like I don't have to keep explaining myself, Republican voters made it clear they agree. They want to play to win. They certainly don't want to lose. When they elect a person who stands for certain things, they want them to actually get into office and fulfill those things. But anyway, so in response to the disgrace we saw in South Carolina, which maybe shouldn't be surprising because it is a pretty notoriously RINO state, Donald Trump put out the following, saying, the South Carolina State Senate has a big vote on redistricting. I'm watching closely along with all Republicans across the country who are counting on their elected leaders to use every legal and constitutional authority they have to stop the radical left Democrats from destroying our country, which is exactly the way I would put it, right? Let's keep that in mind too, because these, the so-called principled right, the losers, the RINOs, these are the people who always virtue signal and lecture us about the Constitution, We have to reject MAGA populism and stand with the Constitution and historic conservative legal principles and the National Review thesis from 1991 or something like that, right? Okay, but you know what? In this case, that's perfectly fine. I asked then to the principled constitutionalist conservatives, okay, aren't you supposed to respect the Supreme Court then? Why are you keeping unconstitutional congressional maps in place? I thought you were a constitutionalist. But as you find out, a lot of the so-called principled right, as they call themselves, doesn't have any principles besides losing to the left. If it gives them an opportunity to hand victory to the left, they'll do it. So, when it means standing by being supposedly a constitutionalist, that's what they do. When it means being a civil libertarian, that's what they do. Or in this case, when it means literally being a progressive judicial activist, basically saying that, the Supreme Court's ruling on what is effectively affirmative action should not be upheld because, we actually should support race communists. That's exactly what they do. So yeah, legal and constitutional authority. Please hear those words, RINOs. It's not about Trump. It's about the Constitution you claim to care so much about. But anyways, including leveling the playing field against their decades of egregious gerrymandering and census rigging. Absolutely. South Carolina Republicans, be bold and courageous, just like the Republicans of the great state of Tennessee were last week. Yes. Move the U.S. House primaries to August, leave the rest on the same schedule. Everything will be fine. So not yet is Trump threatening primary challenges, but let's not forget, of course, after watching Indiana, that has to be a consideration, at least you would think, of these RINO Republicans. But when you sit there and listen to them, for whatever reason, I suppose that's not much of a concern of theirs. They're so obsessed with losing, they'll even lose their own primary in order to hand a victory to the left, I guess.
29-17, the Senate refuses to concur in House amendments.
Mr. Adams. Aye, Mr. Alexander.
Just look at these guys too. I don't know their names to be clear, but if we were to judge a book by its cover, I would say it seems pretty obvious that they've been in office for 1,000,000 years. They never faced a meaningful primary challenge in their life. They effectively are the institution, and that's the problem, is it not? So, in response, the latest news here is that South Carolina's Governor McMaster, which to his credit is really a pretty solid Republican in contrast to much of the delegation in his state. You know, it's like the rare case where we get a top elected official out of South Carolina who's not a complete rhino. But anyways, he is set now and actually already has overridden the state Senate and himself is using his governor's authority to indeed call that special session to redraw their congressional map, which would, of course, eliminate the sole Democrat House seat that belongs to that geriatric fool, Jim Clyburn. It could pass with a simple majority. So all we need is a simple majority in the Senate to get that done, but who knows at this point how difficult that's going to be. Because after all, you would think, right, if the state Senate is basically tabling the special session, that's probably a sign of how they're going to vote in the actual thing if we are to judge by what happened over in Indiana. But at the same time, do the state senators want to run the risk of ending up like the Republicans who did what they did in Indiana? You know, in this case, you almost wish if you're going to be a corrupt establishment, just power-hungry politician, at least do that effectively, right? At least understand, hey, there's a path for me to really be popular with voters and get reelected and not face primary challenges. You would think at least, but I'm not exactly sure why the RINOs are so obsessed with, as I said, just handing left-wingers political victory. But ever since it is now official, yes, McMaster has called South Carolina lawmakers back for that special session. Not sure what it's going to take, by the way, to get these state senators here to actually do their jobs. I don't know, maybe Lindsey Graham needs to come in, right? It's like, that's the thing is that, well, am I a big fan of Trump still endorsing Lindsey Graham in 2026? Not exactly. But, you know, this is the situation where you need him, right? You need Trump basically to say, look, you know, I've been nice to you. Please do me a favor now and go and tell your like RINO friends over there, hey, you know, do this. This is the right thing to do. You know, that's what you got to do. Get Lindsey Graham, get Tim Scott, get the political institution there that is pro-Trump to say, hey, you know, I'm pro-redistricting. It's okay. You know, we can be RINO losers and still at least go with Trump when he's threatening us, you know, at the end of the day. So that's just an idea I would have. But yeah, we'll keep an eye on this. I'm at least glad that McMaster is calling the special session because at the very least, if it fails, every Republican who voted no has to do so on the record. There's no getting around this by saying, oh, we just tabled it or something like that. And again, I'm just going to say, it's appalling to me how much Republican politicians still don't get it and still don't just understand the moment we are in. To show you that contrast, by the way, let's bring you more updates out of the courts to once again prove it's not a legal issue. The Democrats have no power to fight us on this. It is literally just RINO Republicans fighting other Republicans, because today we likewise got the news. Yet another federal judge has now refused to block Tennessee's 2026 redistricting map. They are a state that got it done, which eliminates the last remaining Democrat seat and now makes the state 9 Republicans to 0 Democrats. So once again, now I think it was like Alabama, Missouri, Florida, all these states have ultimately won in court, unlike Virginia, because guess what? Our maps are actually legal. I know that's a shocker, Democrats. And now Tennessee is joining that list where our maps can now go into effect in 2026. And we've been, maybe every single redistricting video, we basically have been saying, hey, that's another legal victory. Why? Because they're happening that much. This is really easy if Republicans would just do our jobs. Not that hard to get into effect, but, you know, when you're dealing with these idiots, I guess that's what we have to deal with. So, South Carolina, now in special session, we'll see what happens. Not going to have the highest hopes, but, you know, maybe, again, going on the record might change something. Let's now talk about Mississippi, where they don't have a governor as good as McMaster, okay? This guy, Tate Reeves, a pretty notorious RINO loser, if I were to be honest. Total just like Chamber of Commerce style Republican, if you know what I mean by that. But anyway, so Mississippi, guys, was set to do one of their own special sessions, specifically because the courts had ordered them to do so. And one of the great phenomena that we have witnessed ever since the Supreme Court ruling is a bunch of lower federal courts have now basically went to these red southern states and said, okay, because the Supreme Court ruled your districts to be unconstitutional, those districts cannot proceed. Therefore, you have to draw new maps before 2026. And the moment I saw this, I went, yes, because I knew for a fact it was going to be very difficult to get these RINOs to voluntarily do it on their own because they don't like to do anything. But hey, if the courts are saying legally you have to redistrict, you don't have a choice, then there you go, right? At least the courts, in a maybe shocking, ironic turn of events, are forcing Republicans to actually do something. Not stopping Republicans from doing something, but forcing us to actually act. Well, here's the bad news, is that, so over in Mississippi, Governor Tate Reeves is now canceling the Mississippi special session that was set to redraw the maps after a federal appeals court vacated the order that was forcing the state and requiring the state to draw its new Supreme Court aligned map. So in other words, right, the court said to Mississippi, you have to redistrict and order them to do it. All that happened in the appeals court is they basically put the injunction on it and said, okay, that order is now void. So that means what exactly? Mississippi does not have to redistrict, but they still can redistrict. The courts never said anything about that. They just said, now you're not legally required to. So again, you would think if you're a solid Republican, you should look at this and say, well, the courts never said no. They just, so why not still do it anyway? We already scheduled this special session. Let's just go ahead. No, instead, Tate Reeves cancels the special session, basically saying if the courts aren't going to force us to act, then we're not going to act, and then added that he expects lawmakers to redraw their congressional lines in 2027, aka after the elections, even though this is Mississippi, I'm not sure what they're even worried about. Yeah, newsflash, I know Tate Reeves, I don't know, math is complicated for you. The elections are in 2026. Right? We want this done before the midterms. What is the point? You already had the special session like set up, right? You already had all the structure there. And now because some woke appeals court is telling you, oh, well, you know, RINOs, you don't have to win. You're just allowed to win. Okay, so still take the win. It's pretty common sense, no? But this is what we're dealing with. If the courts aren't literally like slapping the RINOs in the face and forcing them to do something, though they will never do it on their own. These people will never achieve sincere, positive, conservative victory on their own. And that is the frustration we are dealing with here. It's just so obnoxious to witness and obnoxious to see, you know, how do you not get it at this point? And then again, like, what is the point of that? Oh yeah, we're going to do it after the midterms, guys. Okay, I guess I'm happy, Mississippi. We're going to have more House seats in 2028. All right, you know, fine, whatever. Why can't you do it in 2026 exactly? You were going to do it in 2026. I don't want to hear any excuses of, oh, it's this and that timeline. You already said it, had it set up. You just canceled it. You just canceled it. Congratulations. You know, left's greatest asset right here. This stuff is just so obnoxious. But anyways, at the very least, hopefully, you know, following that trend, following that pattern we've seen, this is yet another wake-up call for Republican voters to pay more attention, I guess, to primaries. And I don't even mean that as an insult. I will say, in 2026, I witnessed a very positive pattern, which is, in contrast to recent history, a lot of GOP voters were kind of awake, right? And that's what is required to, for example, get Brandon Herrera to beat Tony Gonzalez, or Dan Crenshaw to lose his primary, or Indiana RINOs to get beat out of office, right? Because if you're the low propensity voter who just keeps checking the Republican box and the incumbent box, then we're never going to get anywhere. But, you know, clearly the base is more active with this stuff. We care more now. We're paying more. There's just better voter education all around. So I would say, by the way, you know, to these geriatric fossil RINOs in the South who have been there for 30 years that, you know, this is not 1998 anymore. This is a different Republican electorate. You're playing with fire. I would suggest you not do it. You know, as I said, if you want to be a corrupt, power-hungry politician, then be a corrupt, power-hungry politician. Vote yourself into power, not out of power. Like, what are you doing here? What's going on, right? But no, in reality, they'd rather have a job on MSNBC, I guess, than actually keep their political office that they claim is their life's mission. It's just so ridiculous. But anyway, so there's some good news. There's some bad news. We got to keep the pressure up. That's all I can say. So, you know, certainly Trump, I hope Trump continues to be vocal about South Carolina. Maybe that'll put some pressure on. Hopefully we don't get another thing like Indiana where they said, oh, we're the Hoosiers and Hoosiers don't like being told what to do, and then they just lose their freaking primaries. Like, yeah, actually Hoosiers want you to redistrict, but are they gonna do, oh, we're the Gamecocks, we're the Palmettos, don't like being told what to do, we don't take orders from Washington, as you have like the two most Washington senators in the country or something. ridiculous. But I hope obviously Trump puts the pressure on. I hope we at least use Lindsey Graham being there for something good. I'd like to see that, frankly. Use the political chess pieces that you have, but we'll find out, guys. It's just frustrating to have to explain the same things every week about why actually politics is important, that we win. It's important, when the left is so violent and insane, that we do everything in our legal power not to give them political power, not to give them control over this country. It literally is a life or death matter in many ways. But no, apparently we gotta respect fairness, even though that's exactly what we're doing, because DEI districts aren't fair. But in reality, as I said, these people are cowards. They are scared to piss off the left. They're scared to attract negative headlines and no kings protesters. And that's what it's really about, right? They're not bold. They're not principled. They're basically these lazy people fishing for attention and praise from leftists, right? Because if some libtard on MSNBC says, "Oh, I really appreciate so-and-so for being a principled Republican," they're like, "Yay," because I guess that's who you're really seeking approval from, That doesn't ring alarm bells in your head, by the way. The worst people on earth are praising me. Well, I guess not, because to them, it's not the worst people on earth. They probably like those people a lot more than they like their duly elected president, Donald Trump. I'm just saying. That's how this stuff goes. But yeah, that said, let me know your thoughts, guys, in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.